Hi and welcome to this week's Ask GMBN Tech. Questions about bikes and stuff. If you've got any questions you want to know about bike tech, get involved down there in the comments. We're going to fire away with the first question this week from Christian Schaefer, who says, how much bushing play is acceptable for a Fox 38? I've got a little play on the damper side, no play on the air side, just like a little loose headset. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, Fox say a little bit of play is fine because if they were super tight, then it wouldn't work very well anyway. But you can check by grabbing hold of the fork. So grab hold of the lowers down by the axle when you're looking at the bike and give it a good rock, see if it knocks, and then move it back up to the stanchions, give that a good rock backwards and forwards and see if it knocks. So if it's properly knocking, like you can feel it and hear it, I would say your bushings probably need servicing or replacing. Yeah,
I mean, the only thing I find a little strange with that is it says a little play on the damper side, but none on the air side. There must be some play. You have to have some play for them to move on those.
Could he have damaged one, maybe, and not the other?
I would say have another feel. I reckon there must be a little bit of play on both sides. But I don't think there's no problem with play on forks unless, like you say, unless it's excessive, and then you probably do need bushings. But they last a fair while.
Yeah,
they're not a thing that wear out quickly. Yeah.
I think the headset's a good analogy, isn't it? Because if it properly knocks, like you can really feel it. Like when a headset is loose, that's when it's bad, and that's when I think you would replace them. Next up, we've got Dan's Biking Adventures. He said, would there be any advantage in upgrading my Fox 34 fork to a Fox 36? If I were to upgrade from my Fox 34, what would you recommend? Well, let's say the difference between the two of them straight away.
Well, it also depends what you want out of it. So my previous bike was a Nukeproof Reactor, and that had a Fox 34 in it. But I also had a Fox 36 that I liked riding on it. The 34 is slightly lighter, slightly more flexible. You won't notice it really torsionally unless you ride ridiculously hard. The time where you will notice it is when you're braking hard, especially if you're heavy. I'm quite heavy, you brake hard, you notice a bit more backwards and forwards than you do on a 36. So that is a significant difference between the two. But if you're in similar travel regions, depends what you want. If you want to stick with the lightweight, stay with the 34. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a great fork. But if you're going hammer time, the 36 is definitely a better fork for pushing harder and at bigger travel.
Well, the clue's in the name, isn't it? So Fox 34 literally means the diameter of the stanchions, doesn't it? So the 36 is wider, so they're stiffer, and that's what you get out of it. But I think you want to check what travel your frame can actually take, because I'm pretty sure that the 34s only take 130 and 140, and so if you want to move up to a 36, I believe they're 150, 160.
You can run them at 140. I have.
Are you like reshim them?
Yeah. You could just change the air leg on the inside.
Okay.
And you can upgrade them on the 34s, but there are limitations to how long you can make it. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. But you can run the 36 safer at a shorter travel than you could run the 34 at a longer travel, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't want to run the 34 any longer than that anyway.
So it depends whether you want to make that adjustment or if you're buying off the shelf then, I guess.
But don't be put off by the 34. It's a great fork. And I think a lot of people are like, oh no, it's not as good as 36. It's like, well, it's just a different fork for a different application. Next up's from Graham Kingston. I was wondering, you can get 1.5 steerers or 1.8. What's the difference and how do I make sure I don't get the wrong one? Just before dive into answering this one, you've got to bear in mind, for those of you that aren't aware, you could used to get steerers in 1 inch, and it was 1 inch all the way up, like that old thing up there. Then you could get steerers that were 1 1/8 all the way up. And then as frames got a bit more hardcore, someone thought it was a good idea to make a 1.5 steerer the entire way through, which gave it loads of stiffness, but you ended up with a dirty great stem that weighed loads. So what the industry did then was make a tapered steerer. So they had 1.5 at the bottom, tapering up to 1 1/8 for the top, and that's pretty much the standard. Although now, on some e-bikes, they're starting to spec a 1.8 at the bottom here. So it's still 1 1/8 for the top, but massive 1.8, just for a bit more strength. That's just where you are with that stuff. And you can tell the difference simply by measuring them. And you could fit a 1.5 in a frame ready for 1.8, but you're not going to get the 1.8 in a frame ready for a 1.5.
Yeah, so I guess for Graham, if you're replacing a fork you're getting a new fork on your bike, check what you've got. You've probably got 1.5 because that's
most common,
the standard enduro and trail bikes. So that's what you want. Or if you've got an e-bike, then you might be looking at a 1.8.
Yeah,
but
on
that's
pretty modern e-bikes, to be fair, that are adapting to that. You see, I think Thock are one of the earlier brands to adopt to that, but you're going to start seeing that on more and more e-bikes. And it's not necessarily something that's any better or any stronger. It's just a stiffness thing with the overall system weight on a bike, just to help with that, really.
Cool. So next up, we've got Christian Schneider here, who said, the damping dials on my Fox suspension don't have a hard stop at the end. If you turn them further than the last click, you hit a spongy end. Do you count this as the clicks from fully closed, from that spongy bit, or from the first click?
From the spongy bit.
Right.
So
I wasn't quite sure on this, so I had to ask you. But
so let's use this as an example. So this is a RockShox, but still the same thing. So on the high-speed compression, you've got 5 clicks, or 5 clicks of adjustment. But what you'll notice with 5 clicks is there's only actually 4 clicks. It's 5 positions. So that is the spongy bit that you're talking about. So that is 1. That click means you're on number 2, 3, 4, 5 positions, basically. And then you're back to another spongy bit.
So spongy is fully closed, and then if you're using the recommended clicks, out.
I think I'm going to officially use spongy from now on.
Yeah.
That's fully closed. When you get to spongy bit, you're fully closed.
I think I'm so used to Fox where I'm spoilt with like 20 odd clicks.
Yeah.
I've just not really thought about it.
Next up's from Ruken79. Hello, why is oil coming out from the air valve when I release pressure from my fork and shock? And why do I need 50 psi more than recommended on my shock? It's a Canyon Neuron CF9.
Right, well, question 1, don't worry about a little bit of oil coming out your air valve. There's oil in that chamber and it's high pressure, so sometimes it just leaks out a little bit.
Don't get it in your eyes, though. Horrible stuff.
I don't think he's trying to squirt himself in the eye, but yeah. So what do you reckon about number 2 then? I think he means perhaps they've recommended a certain PSI for his body weight.
Yeah.
And he's having to put about 50 psi more in there to get the right sag. That's what I'm taking from that question. Okay, so it's a recommended setting. Yeah, you may well end up having to just run that bit more, but there's also other circumstances. So I'll give you an example. Being a tall rider, I quite often end up having to run more air pressure in a shock because of the geometry of the bike, not necessarily the shock. So if I'm on a bike that's got a really slack seat angle, i.e. not a modern steep one, my body weight's going to be much further backwards by the time my saddle is up. So that effectively puts more leverage on the shock, so I end up having to run a little bit more air pressure. So things like that can affect it. Also, spacers will change it as well. So certain bikes will come with spacers in the shocks or in the forks because that's what the manufacturers will think is best for their type of suspension, their frame, or their setup.
Yeah.
And that will change the volume of your shock. So you might actually have to have slightly more, slightly less, depending on how many spacers are in there. So I always go by measuring sag and working out the percentage sag rather than looking
worrying
at
about the air pressure
PSI,
too much.
because that doesn't really tell you anything. It's just a start point.
Yeah, and also if you're going to be doing this, make sure you're obviously wearing all your riding gear, so you're at the weight that you are when you're riding your bike. If you're measuring your sag, you've not got like 3 litres of water on your back and stuff. It does make quite a big difference.
Okay, so Geppetto says, simple question here. Oh, I don't know if it is a simple question or a simple answer. Are suspension seat posts worth it as opposed to dropper seat posts? I think there's two
Massively
things we might
things.
need to address in that question.
Yeah.
So a dropper seat post, although it's got sort of a shaft that looks like suspension and it is telescopic, but that's because it's dropping down. It's not actually suspension at all, although it kind of looks like one arm, I would say. It's not there to give you any suspension. A suspension seat post is something quite different, and they give you movement, effectively, depending on the brand.
As for are they worth it, I think absolutely for certain things. For example, if I was going bikepacking where I don't need to be able to drop the saddle out of the way, but I'm going to be sat down arguably on a vibration-y type surface for a long time, it could be a really good thing to have on your bike.
I know people who swear by them. Yeah.
But yeah, like you just saying, they're two completely different products that do different things.
And are droppers worth it? Well, I love it.
I couldn't live without a dropper post.
I'd put a dropper post on my gravel bike, my road bike, everything. If
I said this a long time ago, I would rather ride a rigid bike with a drop post than a suspension bike with a rigid post. There's a video in there.
There you have it, folks.
Okay, next up was from Jollingness. Hi, I'm interested in a Nukeproof Reactor ST. Is there anything else different? Is there anything else beside a different shock needed to decrease the travel to 125? No, essentially it's the same shock, eye to eye length. It's just got a spacer on the inside, 2.5mm spacer to reduce the travel by a tiny bit. So really, there's barely any difference between them. And on the ST, you have a slightly shorter fork spec. You have a 130 rather than a 140. Changes the angles, give or take, around a degree. I think a little bit less than that. But that's it. That's what makes it an ST. But we were talking about this earlier. There's a big difference in how it feels. It's only 5mm difference on the back end, but it does feel so different. And I love how the bike feels as an ST. Don't get me wrong, it feels really good in standard setting as well, but I really love that short travel feel. So you could just put a spacer in the shock. You probably have to get a suspension specialist to do that for you, but it would mean you wouldn't have to buy a separate shock to get the ST feel.
Good tip. Right, well, I think that's a good bombshell to end it on.
Wow,
then.
I didn't realise we were at the end. There's loads.
Yeah.
Good questions. All Fox themed this time, so maybe we should change it up next time.
It's a Fox theme special. Yeah. I think we should do maybe a SRAM and a Shimano and some RockShox.
Let's have some RockShox questions as well, yeah. Get your RockShox questions in, get your Shimano questions in, and get your SRAM questions in. Put hashtags so we can find them easily, and we'll do a dedicated ask for each of those.
Yeah, use hashtag Ask GMBN Tech down in the comments below so we can find those questions, and we'll try and get back to you.
Yeah, cool beans. See you soon.